what the hell? Let's do it.
That's the spirit. To quote the great Joseph Campbell, he said, "It is by going down into the abyss where we recover the treasures of life. Where you stumble, there lies your treasure." To the ironic twist of the unknown. Bottoms up.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Happy heresy, then. Welcome to the desert of the real. Welcome to the virtual Alexandria, and welcome to Aeon Byte. I hope everybody's having a good Saturday and a good weekend. My name is Miguel Connor, and I am still your host and your pompatus of Gnosis. And yes, I'm very excited about this show. It's long overdue, and the book we'll be talking is certainly long overdue and a page turner. I couldn't put it down, and I am so happy to talk to its author. Often I like to use two quotes that I think are part of the ethos of Aeon Byte. One of them is, I may be crazy, but I'm not wrong. The other one is, reality is anything you can get away with. And those quotes are obviously by the great Robert Anton Wilson. And today it is a pleasure to have Gabriel Kennedy to talk about his book, Chapel Perilous, the biography of Robert Anton Wilson. Gabriel, thank you very much for coming on Aeon Byte.
Hi, Miguel. Thank you for having me here. That was a very kind introduction. And hi, Vance. How are you doing today?
Yes, Vance. You've left the Overlook Hotel. You escaped after our show on Stanley Kubrick. Now you're in a different reality tunnel, right?
That's right. I'm in Chapel Perilous.
There you go. We all should be there. And God knows this age is one collective Chapel Perilous. And we'll certainly get into that in this show. So for everybody, I see everybody in the chats. Good to see everybody. Good to see you, Mike Frank, Black Evil, Texas Magi Dude. Yeah, we got some Discordians and at least ethos all in the chat room. As always, if you have any questions or complaints against Vance or I, please super chat them so we can get to them. And there's a lot to cover, so we should definitely get into it. So first of all, why don't we start with you, Gabriel? Tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got into Raw.
Sure. Yeah. My name is Gabriel Kennedy. These days, I pretty much describe myself as a multimedia artist, concentrating on the written word, visual art, acting, and music. I've written before this book, which is my first book, Chapel Perilous, Life and Thought Crimes of Robert Anton Wilson. Before writing this book, I've written a series of articles for different online websites and magazines like Boing Boing, Mondo 2000, my own sites, Reality Sandwich, etc. I was in the world of music for a number of years, both within sort of like the New York and kind of global hip hop scene, producing work and visual art, and then also in sort of like the rock music scene. And then was always writing, though. I discovered the work of Robert Anton Wilson in high school, my senior year, read Illuminatus trilogy, and it sort of became like a Bible of sorts. It became my go-to book, and Wilson sort of became my sounding board in many ways as years developed. After Illuminatus, I read Cosmic Trigger Volume 1 and Prometheus Rising, and those two books pretty much set me on a track to want to read more of Wilson and discover more of his work. And at the time, he was still alive. So that was exciting, to find a living writer that was really inspired by and touching on the writers that I had read before him, people like Henry Miller and Friedrich Nietzsche, and but these people were dead, and here was this person, carrying the torch, if you will. And I was very interested in then meeting him and seeing, what the guy was like, but that would not be for many years later. And that was in 2003 when I met Wilson after the premiere of his Maybe Logic after the premiere of a documentary that was based on his life called Maybe Logic, The Lives and Ideas of Robert Anton Wilson. It was in Santa Cruz. And I interviewed him the next day, and that sort of was the beginning of this book in many ways. Like, that was the seeds of this book, because shortly after that interview, he started the Maybe Logic Academy, which was his online asynchronous remote learning website that he started with the director of Maybe Logic. So together they formed this amazing online website that's 20 years ahead of the curve. I mean, most major colleges, especially during COVID, they began using this asynchronous remote learning format. I mean, it's almost exactly the same. There are forums, modules, weekly modules, et cetera, et cetera. And so Wilson started this site in 2004, and he was there till his death in 2007. So for those 3 years, I took almost all of his classes and workshops. And he brought in other awesome thinkers, like people like, Douglas Rushkoff, Eric Davis, Starhawk, Peter Carroll, Reverend Ivan Stang, David J. Brown. The list goes on and on. It was like an all-star cast of amazing, thinkers and writers at this time when it was a totally different era now of the internet, which is very interesting because Wilson died, shortly before the emergence of the iPhone, which, the iPhone introduces the world that we're in today. Wilson was the kind of last breath of the techno-utopianist vision for the internet, where it could be used as a collaborative tool to make everybody smarter and more intelligent. And I like to think that maybe Logic Academy was such a place for the most part. And so after he died, I kind of just, took it on myself to go deeper in learning his work. And this whole thing sort of emerged organically. And then, it started out as a book about his ideas, but then I kind of wanted to put a spine together to chart the development of his ideas through time, because Wilson's, like any dynamic thinker, he's moving through many different phases. And just to contextualize his work, so for instance, Cosmic Trigger Volume 1, you read about this guy who's moving all the time, but he's doing all this wild interior research that's like, how can you stay grounded when you're doing all that stuff and you're doing all this acid on top of it, And that book was so inspiring, not to say that it inspired anyone to do a bunch of acid and magic, but more so how to stay grounded if you find yourself in those states, right? And so, just being again, him pretty much becoming my favorite writer, the book became the final lesson, if you will, of how to really understand his work. I learned that from Wilson and many great teachers, is the best way to learn a subject is to teach a class or to produce something about it. So this is all really an attempt to go further in understanding his work. But when I started writing the biography, I took it very seriously, and I wanted to do a really proper job of it. And I wanted to, really do a bang up job in terms of research and compile some things that have not been compiled yet. And I think I really did that in this book. So, from my work personally to working on this book, it was just all an organic trajectory. So, and the book really became everything else that I did. Any other sort of art that I practiced, really went by the wayside through many phases of writing this book. This book just became my constant. It became my life raft in many ways. So,
I know the feeling. It's like you're possessed. As Jung says, you don't pick ideas; ideas pick you. And yeah, it's wonderful. You have a foreword written by Grant Morrison, which of course I was like, ooh, that's great. And this is the only bio of Robert Anton Wilson, right? I know Eric Davis in his book High Weirdness, but that's like 3. He does Robert Anton Wilson, Terrence McKenna, and Philip K. Dick. But this is the only dedicated bio.
Correct. Yes, this is the first. And as Ralph Metzger calls it, the definitive biography of Wilson, because I was able to get source material, like interviewing people who were with Bob, who, I don't know if anyone's working on a biography right now, but some of these people might not be here. No. And some of them passed away throughout the course of writing the book, like Paul Krasner and Arturo Ali, who I was lucky enough to both interview, and, they passed on. So, Yeah, it's the first biography.
Yeah, it's almost surprising, but then again, who Robert Anton Wilson is to you, Philip K. Dick is to me, the sort of that red pill moment. But there's only a handful, and I was surprised. But such is the world. Well, let's talk about your book, because again, it was a page turner, and there were so many new dimensions that I learned about, and you address everything. Even was he a CIA plant? You have that. You have everything. It's not like you're writing a puff piece.
Right.
You really say, this is the man, and I'm standing there objectively writing about his life. So the first question is the world that created Wilson. How did he become Wilson? I think people forget about the silent generation, which he was part of, which people like Bob Dylan, Philip K. Dick, Elvis, Martin Luther King, Noam Chomsky. There's this generation like Gen X that kind of got forgotten, but he was part of it, right? New
For sure.
challenges.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, and that's a fine group of people, right? I mean, the silent generation for sure. He was born in 1932 in Brooklyn, in Flatbush, Brooklyn, and raised by pretty much first generation American parents. Bob's grandparents, his father's side was from Ireland, and his mother's side was from Trieste, and his parents both grew up in Brooklyn. When Bob was about 4 years old, or a little bit, around that age, the impact of the Great Depression finally affected his family. So it had been since the Great Crash in 1929, sweeping through the nation, and America just getting more and more poor. And so the Wilsons moved from Flatbush to a little bungalow community in the South Shores of Brooklyn, like South Brooklyn, dirt roads and everything, no buses, no trains, no anything, a place called Garrison Beach. And it's like a small little kind of plot of land, sort of on like the marshland, if you will, if there is that, in the the South Shores of that, Long Island landmass. And, it was there that Wilson sort of got his first taste of hard reality. He described how at the time there were he didn't even have the polio vaccine, when he contracted polio at the age of 2. His mother, luckily enough, found what is now considered an alternative therapy, the Sister Kenny method, which, kind of flew in the face of medical experts at the time, who, when there was no vaccine for polio, which is a virus contracted from, a fecal matter in water. So, that's all a product of poor infrastructure and bad, municipal plumbing and whatnot, And so, so many kids contracted this and did not have the polio cure or vaccine, Wilson being one of them. But as I said, the Sister Kenny method involved stretching oneself, stretching one's muscles, pushing basically the body, which was the complete opposite of what medical experts were telling his mother, for instance, which was that children should be immobilized and basically stop moving if they have this polio. And so Wilson pretty much always had polio for the rest of his life, but through these techniques and stuff, he was able to sort of maintain and manage the inflammation. Yet he always had things going on with his feet and his legs. He always talked about being about 20 degrees colder than most people usually. And him being a silent generation, that's a great way to describe it, because he really sought to keep, as best as he could, his complaints about his pain as quiet as possible. And, some people try to do that, and some people think they do that, but they don't realize how passive aggressive they become, but Wilson, maybe through, honestly, he'd say it when he discovered like marijuana and LSD, like these two things were very medicinal for him. And then magic, but which he later describes pretty much as like creative visualization or self-hypnosis, him learning those techniques as well, how to manage his pain, et cetera, et cetera. So I say all that to illustrate Wilson grew up in a very hard environment. And Garrison Beach today, which I had the privilege of going to Garrison Beach after I got the book deal. It's kind of a little spiritual journey to pay homage to the man, you know what I mean? Yeah. And it's a one road town still in the South, the last exit to Brooklyn, as one book is titled. It really is like that. Still no train goes there, and buses go there, obviously. But so Wilson came from this environment, and sadly, there was not a lot of nutrition in terms of his intellect when he told his parents that he wanted to be a writer. He wrote his first novel, he said, I think at the age of 12 or something, or 14. It's called The Age of Miracles. And he wanted this guy Danny Kaye to be in the movie, or he wanted a movie adaptation of it as well. So he had big dreams right from the jump, right? But his parents quickly told him, like, you're not of the class that is allowed to have these dreams. We're poor, Bob. Like, the only thing that we get if we try to become writers is we get to starve to death. So if you want that, you could go for it, but it's not going to bode well for you. So Wilson's first mission, he had two early missions in life. The first one was to get out of Catholic school because it was torturous. Right. And he didn't want to go on to Catholic high school, which sounded even more torturous. And getting out of Catholic school was easier than convincing his parents that he wanted to be a writer. But he did it in one fell swoop by taking the test and gaining admittance into Brooklyn Technical, which is an illustrious high school. It's still a very seen in high regard for science and whatnot. So luckily Wilson's mind, he was able to really, pull himself up truly by his bootstraps in many ways through the use of his intellect. His physical body was limited because of, stricken with the polio. And, but he went to Brooklyn Tech and from there, his kind of world opened up a lot. And he was a precocious youth. If we are to believe what he wrote about how many books he read in high school by himself, kind of as an autodidact, it's pretty astounding and phenomenal. Like you mentioned Noam Chomsky. I know that, Chomsky as a kid was reading insane amounts of books and writing all these things. And, to imagine that there were a number of these young people like this walking around Brooklyn who did not come from fancy upbringings, yet they were sort of genius. I mean, they are geniuses, truly. So I think to me, that's inspiring to hear Wilson's beginnings and to see what he was able to do with himself with very little help or support from many places, and especially his parents. Like, that's the first one.
They don't understand us kids. Yes. So yeah, you had the Depression, you had the World War II, then you had the insane post-war American empire. I mean, it was, this generation had a lot to go through. But again, through his life, and it seemed Wilson was very eclectic. He was very open-minded, like you said, very bookish. I'm going to read about this and that, whether it could be Crowley or the Mayans, that sort of eclectic occultism. But what I got, and of course, please correct me, is that he was one of the few who really, it was almost hermetic or Gnostic. He understood that the final frontier wasn't space. There was nothing, not the bottom of the ocean, because there's only water, as the talking head said, but the final frontier was the human mind. That's what could create any reality. That was the magic. But the powers that be could control that and create false reality. So again, when you look at what really gave him passion, from Wilhelm Reich to Carl Jung, I mean, do you agree with that he really was a psychonaut? He thought this is where it's at, as a human mind.
Oh, most definitely. Yeah, and that eclecticism as well. Where exactly does that originate? I think that was one of the questions that I had while writing the book, especially his early years. Mm-hmm. And I think he was just drawn to writers and thinkers that also were drawing together all these different, seemingly disparate things. So it could run the gamut from Buckminster Fuller to James Joyce, Ezra Pound, But philosophically, like, I think what really like was an early undercurrent to his thinking and his whole approach to the rest of his career was that book, Science and Sanity. So written by Alfred Korzybski and was published in 1933. And Bob came across it in New York Library when he was, as he said, the age of 16. And this book is a true doorstopper. It's it's a brick, and it's 800 plus pages. And Korzybski was under the firm belief that people needed to clarify our language to the point of to make it as solid as calculus, right? So Korzybski was what is pretty much termed now a linguistic determinist, right? So the words we use and how we use them have a large influence, if not determine, the way that we think about the world. And if we can't describe something, then we can never even imagine it, or we can never truly visualize it. We can have an inkling of a vision in our head, but we need the tools of these words that we utilize, et cetera, to really manifest or maximize this vision. And so Korzybski's, again, like as simply as possible, like his and his approach that gets later called general semantics, and there's a whole school that's formed around this Korzybski's approach, which in many ways is sort of about evolving the use of our language to make it match current science. So as we utilize non-Newtonian physics to create things like computer screens and TVs, and now we're in the world of quantum computing, like we also need to utilize non-Aristotelian forms of thought, and that's pretty much how we make sense of things, Aristotle's excluded middle, right, which zeroes in on what Korzybski called the is of identity, which essentially applies an essential quality to a person, place, or thing. But this being the raging debate back to Heraclitus, that one can never step in the same river twice because of the flux of movement of reality. So very, very simply put, Korzybski's presenting a process philosophy, which I guess the academic term is today, one which also Alan Watts utilizes, and that's pretty much the fact that we're in non-simultaneous networks of constant change and rotation and cyclical movement, as opposed to these sort of linear progressions, one object through empty space to another object. So this blew Bob's mind when he first read Science and Sanity at the age of 16. It answered this raging question that he had, as a lot of young people have at that age, perhaps, and that was, what is reality? Right. Really, when we look at it, come on, what are we talking about here? Because Bob was a young, inquisitive mind. He used to say that the neighbors used to call him, they said he should have been a lawyer, because he was young and quite loquacious. Right. He was probably super inquisitive and just asking all these questions all the time. This is pure speculation, but I imagine that he had a very patient father who was able to really give him some nice grounded explanation of things. And that perhaps was a nice emotional stability through his young life of a lot of tumultuous events and whatnot, both outside of him and going on, locally or whatever. So this kind of general semantic undercurrent matched with Wilson being a product of the 20th century and now including all these changing communication technologies, from the radio being in his house at the age of 6 to then later a TV, et cetera, as things morph and change, and film and whatnot. Wilson is aware of, how fast things are starting to change around him. Right. And so he's that, I think, adds to this eclectic nature, right? This, if things lose an essential quality and things become a lot more existential, you are yourself in relation to the people and the places that you are in, not so much you have this, essential quality. So I think his eclecticism is him being a product of his time and him being very aware of what was going on throughout the 20th century through technological development and scientific development, and really across the board. He was, as I said in the book, he was an early warning radar system. He was just, his mind was just, all the windows were open, the channels were on.
Exactly. I would agree. And at the same time, some people have talked to, well, he was just a thinker, but he was also an individual who had certain experiences of the numinous, right? Not just sometimes on drugs, but sometimes he had premonitions, he had visions. I mean, he saw behind the veil at times.
Yeah, I mean, I think that was like an area that he was seeking to really explore and forward, especially in the the mid 70s, and what isn't pretty much encapsulated in Cosmic Trigger Volume 1. His I guess the metaphors that he used for that exploration into that realm was more the thelemic, a little bit of the Jungian, and of course, a transpersonal psychological bent. Wilson, but to zero in quicker on your question there about non psychedelic experiences of the numinous, as you put it, like at the age of 18, he this could have been his first experience with what maybe he called a satori or a mini satori, which is a Japanese term for like a sudden enlightenment. He described it as just kind of walking along one day on the street, but he described it sort of in Kurt Vonnegut terms of, becoming unstuck in time.
Right.
As, I think the main character from Slaughterhouse-Five became, and which is very interesting. Like, this is Wilson's sort of first experience of the numinous, has this, theme, if you will, of time. And this becomes a major area of sort of exploration for him. It's not pronounced throughout his work. However, I shouldn't say it's overly explicit in it. It's not overly explicit in his work, but it's there. Is that, especially you see it in Cosmic Trigger Volume 1, that when he goes to these places, these entities are babbling what he thinks is gibberish, but later on he puts it together that they're trying to tell him things about time. So that's an interesting parallel. I mean, to kind of go off on a tangent a bit, I mean, you mentioned Grant Morrison earlier. That's an area where Morrison has explored a lot too, especially in, the comic book, The Invisibles, that great comic book.
Oh, yeah.
And this sort of theme that comes up, I guess, in psychedelic explorations, that why time, the question of time keeps coming up. And back to Wilson, he had that in the psychedelic state, but again, and also at the age of 18, totally sober. So I guess for him, peeling back the veil involved like seeing through the illusion of time or something like that.
That's a good way to put it. Again, there are many more. I don't know if you want to talk about his suicide attempt when that really shifted his life. The other one I could not get through, that stayed with me, Gabriel. Oh, and by the way, Nameless is the best Grant Morrison graphic novel. Nobody read it but me, but it's still my favorite, and I will die on that hill. But anyway, that's neither here nor there. But the one that stuck with me, and it's almost tragic, and it made me frustrated about being a human, was the one where he had a premonition about his son Graham going to die. And he was freaking out, and what happened was his other daughter, poor Luna, was murdered not too after that. It's like, when the communication comes out and we never get it right, you know what I mean? Our premonitions, they're off. But that one was heartbreaking because, again, her death and then later Graham's schizophrenia, of course, were huge events in his poor life.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say those are sort of the two most dramatic parts of Wilson's adult life, I suppose, like in the most horrible way possible, right? And I think, I mean, so in early October 1976, Bob's 15-year-old daughter, Patricia Luna Wilson, was murdered at her after-school job, which was just a mere 10-minute walk from their house in Berkeley, California. And it was a vintage clothing shop, and it was set a little deeper in the row of stores. So there was sort of some kind of homeless people that hung out, or maybe people who were addicted to drugs and whatnot. It was a sort of a dangerous sort of spot in a way. But Luna was a strong girl. Bob talked about that a lot, and she had a great charm, and people liked being around her. However, a person came in that on when she was at work that one afternoon and basically brutally murdered her in a seeming robbery, where the assailant took $50 from the register and brutally murdered Luna. Yeah. And so this was preceded by, however, what you spoke about, Wilson having like a precognitive sort of vision of, or voice really, during a, I guess it was a, kind of pagan, it was with he was with the New Reformed Orthodox Order of the Golden Dawn. It was a ritual that they were all doing. And this was like, a Bay Area sort of conglomeration of pagan hippies, like doing some fun stuff. And, Wilson and Arlen, his wife, they hung out with them and stuff. And they were doing a ritual called the Cone of Power ritual, which was, seeking to focus this sort of conical energy up above everyone's heads. And you could then direct that energy if you put an intention in mind. And pardon me, sorry, that was another vision. Bob had a few visions. That was another vision that Bob had of Graham when they're doing a Cone of Power ritual. That was in 1974. The one that what he experienced in 1976, before the death of Luna, was he was speaking at an event and then sharing the stage with an artist who Jean Malay, I believe her name was, and a man named Tim Scully, who was actually, I guess, the inventor of orange sunshine acid, who also then later got into developing computers. And she built like an art installation piece, but was really geared towards it was sort of a mind machine, if you will, like a neurofeedback sort of biofeedback thing. And Wilson spoke about how biofeedback machines will put one in or neurofeedback machines will put one in different brainwave states, alpha, beta, et cetera, brainwave states. And Wilson entered a certain brainwave state, right? He determined, and then he heard a voice, and it was Graham's gonna die, right? Something like that. And then after that, he was spooked, and then he did all these prayers and visualizations to protect Graham and protect everyone in his family. And then shortly after, Luna was murdered. And then Graham, to make matters worse, shortly after that, had a schizophrenic breakdown. And then that, as Christina, one of the other of Bob and Arlen's daughters, told me, sort of really was a stressful event, tore a tenuous thread of a family apart, as she described it. And Wilson, I mean, that's some of the hardest sort of, I guess, parapsychological information one can receive. And then the added pain in feeling like you got it wrong. That I don't know what one could do. I mean, however, and then this gets into the realm of parenting, which I am not a parent, and I'm not going to speak on that, other than it from all, and everything that I read and heard about them was Bob loved his kids very much, and this tore him apart. And, but he, you could say, he carried on and he kept writing, and he used his art and his writing to work through a lot of really hard emotions. And you could see that in his fantastic book, Schrodinger's Cat Trilogy.
Mhm.
This book, it's 3 books, of course, and it's such a great, fantastic discussion of 3 theories of quantum physics that he was fascinated with, like Bell's theorem, or quantum entanglement, the many
Right.
worlds theory, and some other thing. And he also filtered all of this hard feeling and emotion and all the shame that he felt, like the real stuff now, like not just Bob, this fantastic, fun kind of superhero sort of thinker, right? Like it's like Bob, like the very humble guy walking through life that like has to sit with the fact that he felt like he let his daughter die brutally, and then watched his son, really kind of lose his mind. And at the time when Luna was murdered, Bob was friends with like this sort of first generation life extension culture that was developing in Berkeley at the time. So he knew people that worked at this cryogenics, right?
Yeah,
Like
yeah.
this, he was in the cryogenics scene, if you will. And that was a big thing at the time, a growing intellectual trend in Berkeley. And so there was a facility called Time Cryogenics, where they offered to take Luna's brain because her body was too damaged, and to sort of cryogenically freeze it in the hope that perhaps one day, DNA sequencing and cloning or whatever. Bob both really believed in life extension and the possibility of cryogenics, but this was also his way of dealing with the sudden death. But he always made it a point to say that he still really firmly believed in cryogenics. So that's one response that he had to this tragic event. But I try to get all of this in there at that time, that time frame. Yeah, that's sort of like peeling back the veil and the death of his child. Like he had other visions after that, but sadly that was like, he was having all these wild visions, and that was a very difficult grand opus to receive. And
Yeah, indeed. It's something else. And again, your book details so many of his other visions. He was certainly a mystic. Again, I don't know what I want to call his metaphysics. I think maybe Eric Davis is right. He just calls it high weirdness for this second part of the 20th century, when you have this mixture of mysticism and science and ufology and quantum physics and entheogens, and you throw it together and you get people again, Terence
right.
McKenna, Wilson, Philip K. Dick, David Bowie. It's kind of, call them psychonauts, because again, they believe that unlocking the powers of the mind is how we get out of this. But anyway, I'm just playing with ideas, Gabriel. But I want to bring in Vance. Vance, do you have a question about Robert Anton Wilson for Gabriel?
Yeah.
I'm going to let the Schrodinger's cat out real quick. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah. Could you say that Cosmic Trigger was his response to his daughter's death? That's the way I remember it, having read it many years ago. It was a lot about the death of his daughter, and he brought, Aleister Crowley into it and so forth. There was a lot going on.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it was definitely one response to I think kind of really help him cope. I think that Bob really utilized art as self-therapy, and his writing as such, although he would layer it with other things like great thoughts. So it wouldn't be the first thing that you'd really pick up was like, oh, wow, this guy's really grieving, and he's using this writing as a way to kind of, feel better from tragedy. because his mind was so expansive. And so Cosmic Trigger is a response to the death of his daughter, but it's also, material that he was working on for many years before then as well. And so it's a bit of a cut and paste of some other books at the time that did not get published, that now have been posthumously published, like this book called The Starseed Transmissions, which Bob wrote, he said, and he told his friend Greg Hill in 3 weeks. And it was all about Timothy Leary and why Timothy Leary should be freed from prison. But that book didn't end up getting published during Bob's life. So what he did was he would take little bits of that and put it in Cosmic Trigger, et cetera, bits of his articles. So yeah, Bob was a dedicated everyday 9 to 5, or sometimes way more hours at the desk at a typewriter, typing away in the classic sense of a writer as we used to think about him, from typewriter to then later Mac keyboard. But yeah, I mean, his from Crowley to the exploration of the Illuminati in Cosmic Trigger. Wilson was as Peter Carroll said, like, he had a jet engine mind, right? And he was so able to just take all these widely disparate, seemingly unrelated things and just like pull them all together and weave a very consistent, flowing narrative explaining and unpacking all of these jargonized terms and philosophies and sciences. So I think he did that in Cosmic Trigger as well. Like, he was, a public intellectual of the stoner intelligentsia of the underground American, counterculture.
Love it.
That's why he's so important.
Yeah, the conflict there, an oxymoron almost. Stoner intellectual.
Yeah, exactly. And what would you say were, for the audience, his politics? Surprising nobody, I would agree with Wilson, 90% of his politics.
Yeah, I think what's so interesting about Bob is that this is one reason why I wrote the book. I wanted to chart on a graph, essentially, through space and time, like where he sat on the political spectrum, from left to right and whatnot. And this is why Bob is so great, because just like he would present conspiracy theories and then present political theories, he also presented an analytical meta-analysis of all these theories, an anthropological query as to, well, why do we even have political parties to begin with? Why do human beings even think like this? And the whole idea of the left-right, political spectrum came about from the French Revolution, right? Where, those who were with the king sat on the left side, those who weren't sat, or vice versa, right? Those who were with the king sat on the right side, et cetera, et cetera. But so Bob, in his writing, always expressed a dedicated desire to transcend this left-right paradigm. And in that respect, a very illustrative article and great article to read if you want to learn more about this is an article called, I think it's like Beyond Left and Right, or I have it right here. It's in my book, and it's called, Beyond Left and Right, a non-Euclidean perspective. So really beginning in the 70s, in the mid 70s, Wilson hopped on this notion that we have to get beyond this left and right divide. And one way to do it is to focus on going into outer space. I should perhaps, I charted this in my book. So there's what Wilson writes, and then there's how Wilson lived as well, right? And so even though he would describe himself perhaps at times as an agorist, which in 1971 he told Israel Regardie that he was an agorist, which might sit more on the right side of the libertarian spectrum. Wilson consistently, statistically, acted as a left libertarian, if there's a definition. I mean, in 1992, he even voted, right? This was a
How
person
dare
who,
he?
right, like, in the early 60s, Wilson described himself, he dedicated himself to anarchism after coming across Prince Peter Kropotkin's book Mutual Aid. And then he went to an early sort of intense period of learning about individual American anarchists, anarchism, etc. And he became dedicated to like this egoist anarchism, atheism, an atheistic sort of approach. But his experiences through the 70s, he softens his tone of calling himself like a kind of raving anarchist, because in the late 60s he was working at Playboy, but was the most politically active that he'd ever been in terms of on the street protesting and organizing peace demonstrations. And he was in various anarchist organizations and whatnot. He, as I said, though, like by the mid 70s, his perspective is towards, he calls it like upland. There was a book called Upwingers, which was written by this individual who spoke about basically the same thing, that humans needed to evolve beyond this left-right political divide. So I think that was part of the sale of libertarianism at the time as well. I think it was sort of being presented as like, this will get people beyond this left-right divide, because the civil liberties of the traditional left, but like a fiscal application of sort of more traditional right, perspectives towards economics. But Bob was focused in the mid 70s of getting Tim Leary out of jail and going to outer space. My point in all of this is that Bob never voted Republican in his life. When he did vote in 1992, he voted for Clinton. He later regretted that. He said that, a friend convinced him to vote for him. But he did like the fact that Bill Clinton was a fan of this book called Non-Zero by Robert Wright. And ultimately, Wilson finally lands on this place where he wanted limited government, like he liked minarchy. This is at the end of his life. But he was an individualist anarchist of the collectivist bent, meaning there's an oxymoron, but meaning an individual cannot be fully free, like unless like he's around fully free people. And, a fully free society can't be fully free unless everyone is fully free, right? So we have to work together to support each other's individual freedom. And as simple as that sounds, it's much harder to accomplish. So by the end of his life, Bob was back to describing himself as an anarchist again, though. His time in Europe made him very interested in going beyond, Republican Democrat parties, obviously. But yeah, he died an anarchist.
Good man. Good man. Good to hear that. And in keeping in line with the show, obviously it's no secret that the patrons, the spiritual patrons of the show, well, beyond Elvis, is Philip K. Dick and Carl Jung. And your book goes into detail about Jung and his interest in Jung. And then, but there's also this great passage about his meeting with Philip K. Dick, which I thought was just invaluable. Can you tell the audience about that?
Sure. Yeah, the first and only time Bob and Philip K. Dick met each other was in, I believe it was 1978 at a science fiction conference that Bob's friend Scott Appel brought Bob to. And Scott was also good friends with Philip K. Dick. So he introduced them together at like a hotel room party. where, you know, things get really wild at the sci-fi hotel room parties. And you know, Phil K. Dick, like, I'm not quite sure how they, you know, first, you know, sat down talking, but the way Bob describes it, Phil K. Dick just was like, just asking him all these questions about his experiences during the cosmic trigger years. So one, Phil K. Dick was very aware of Bob's work. And he was, you know, like almost obsessed with Wilson's own experiences. And, you know, Bob noted that a tone of the questioning, though, was so, of course, you know, Phil K. Dick had, as I'm sure you explored in the show, like a reverse amnesia where he remembered, you know, that, you know, the empire never fell, and, you know, we're living in 70 AD. And he saw similarities to what he had to what the experiences Bob had when Bob was questioning the role of Sirius in his far out experiences. But so Bob noticed that Philip was almost seeing how sane Bob seemed, how with it he seemed, because
of all people to judge.
right. Because somehow, like, if Bob seemed grounded and together, well, then Phil was going to be okay, right? And of course, both had such tremendous humor. I'd imagine there was a lot of laughing and jokes, and I think that's one thing that's not known too well about Phil K. Dick, was like how funny he seemed to be, like, with people, like so
yeah, and a prankster.
And a prankster, yes, and that was the first and only time that they seem to have met. But along the way, Phil K. Dick provided a blurb, though, for Wilson, and a very glowing blurb about his work. So I'd say he was a fan of Bob's work.
Yeah. Obviously, they had different cosmogonies and cosmologies for their worldviews, but so it would have been seen how it got there. You want to say something, Rez?
Yeah, this is a good time since you mentioned Scott Appel, and I actually went to see Robert Anton Wilson and Scott Appel at a San Jose science fiction convention in the early 90s. And the thing I remember the most about it, and this is what I'm going to ask you about, he seemed contemptuous of us because after he gave his little spiel, at the end, he just got up and turned his back on us all, and he felt contemptuous, didn't say goodbye, everybody, thanks for coming or anything. He just got up and like walked out.
Gabriel's book answers this too.
Yeah, Miguel
American audiences.
Right.
Rod did not like American audiences.
Yeah, what could you tell us about that?
Well, yes. I put in the book that I guess Bob generally preferred, the European audiences to American audiences. However, especially at that time, 1990, I think that's just this book presents warts and all, right? Like, in some ways, I guess the description of Bob was that he could be very aloof.
Oh yeah.
And, he experienced a lot of social anxiety, as did Philip K. Dick.
He'd say, let's get out of here. That's what he told Scott. I'll never forget that. And it's a shame because I loved, Cosmic Trigger and the Illuminatus, and I was there to see him. And all of a sudden, somebody that I'd kind of admired, like, turned his back on me, just get out of here.
Oh, wow. That's an unfortunate experience. And that's one that,
like I said, Vance, if you only had a cup of tea and spoke with an English accent.
I say,
come with
go back here.
I would just put this in those Bob's shadow, right? I mean, Bob could be a jerk. And I think that was probably Bob just being a jerk to his fans right there at that time. 1990, let me see. He had just sort of, he was just, he was in the Bay Area at that time, just kind of getting back from Europe after some years there. But I don't know. I mean, he, in the book, I write about how his opinion of American audiences at times were not too high. Over the years, that I'd say that definitely softened, though, and he became, more and more open to people. But read the book and see how he did that, right? Because sadly, people can be jerks sometimes, and I have I'm not going to try to. Bob was a dick sometimes, and Bob was a dick. You got to call him a dick.
Yeah. The humans are flawed. I also love the part, really beautiful in your book, bringing in Jung. You talk about when James Joyce came with his daughter Lucia, who had problems, and Jung treated her and told James Joyce, she's schizophrenic, and he's all broken. He said, look, sometimes and James Joyce is like, she must have gotten it for me, that creative, crazy, wild energy. And James Joyce, Jung was like, what happened? And Jung was like, yeah, sometimes when people go down into the waters of the unconscious, one of them drowns and one of them comes out. It's the old saying by Joseph Campbell, the mystic swims where the psychotic drowns. So that's a beautiful story, which it always says there are no guarantees, right? Whether you take some entheogens or you go down into the mystic world, there's always a risk that your mind's not going to come back. Nobody's safe.
Yeah, heck yeah, Miguel.
Look at Sid Barrett. Look at so many. We could come up with a million examples. Look at people who, end their careers like Crowley, addicted to drugs and broken. Alan Watts ended up an alcoholic there's no guarantees when you take this journey into Chapel Perilous, right? There's no guarantees.
That's very true. And Bob relates that story of James Joyce going to Carl Jung to try to help his daughter Lucia, which is a true story. And Bob puts that in his book, Masks of the Illuminati, which was published, I think, in 81 or 82. And this was another book that Bob poured his emotions into in kind of covert sort of ways. Like he was guarded like that still, even in his fiction. But it's when you unlock the code, as I did in doing his biography, and then seeing how much of his personal life that he put into his fiction, even just characters and locations, it's so much fun to see. He describes the scene in Masks of the Illuminati because James Joyce is a character in it, in his book, and as is Carl Jung. And this is Wilson's guarded way, I believe, of letting out and talking about his own Graham's struggles with schizoaffective disorder. Mm-hmm. Bob never mentions this ever in any of his work. He never talks about Graham's illness. I saw Graham in 2003 when I was in Santa Cruz to watch the documentary, Maybe Logic. He looked just like Bob. I was like, I did a double take. I was like, what? Who is that? That's Bob. That's Bob. And basically in Bob's writing, it's you get that Graham wanted to be a physicist and a mathematician. And so sadly, Graham was very much affected by schizophrenia. And I truly believe, he writes about Joyce's grieving in that book. And this is Bob, right? Channeling and using the art to let this and release this a little bit. And it's strange. Like there's a couple directions one could go here. Like when Bob goes to Ireland, after he and Arlen go there in 1982, they'd been living with Graham, and it had just been the three of them. And they had a nice high-rise apartment in Park Merced, San Francisco. Bob's finally making some money with his writing after years of poverty. And sadly, Graham has these outbursts that are very self-destructive and kind of life-threatening. And Bob and Arlen are just blown out. by the end of everything, right? Even Kerry Thornley comes back into the fold, and he's scaring the heck out of Bob and Arlen. Bob's thinking that Kerry might pop out of the bushes and shoot him, coming out one day when he's doing this. And then Reagan got elected, and Bob and Arlen were like, "Yuck, we gotta get out of here," you know. And then someone, a neighbor of theirs, was murdered in Park Merced in 1982, right? And then so they go to Ireland, and they sort of leave Graham with Christina and Alex, their two other children. And during their time in Ireland, Bob pretty much reads a few books and comes across the notion of epigenetics, really, and the effect of trauma on groups, ethnic groups who have went through something horrible. And for the Irish, I mean, it was hundreds of years of stuff, but then it was really capped off with the potato famine in the mid 1800s, which Bob saw that there was read this link between the malnutrition of the mothers having children, and then years later an epigenetic change resulting in high rates of schizophrenia amongst the Irish. It was the highest. They were the highest rates of schizophrenics in all of Europe. So Bob, he blamed himself a lot for the death of Luna, and also for Graham, falling to schizoaffective disorder. But what he sees is that this is within his genetic line almost, and he can't blame himself anymore. It's genetics, right? And as we know what epigenetics now, epi means over, right? And so when there are external events that could trigger a genetic change, these things could happen. And I mean, Bob was on a spectrum of schizo something. I mean, there's studies relating genius and schizophrenia, where it generationally. So, an artist could have a parent that was schizophrenic. So Bruce Springsteen, for instance, his father had schizophrenia, right? And so here's this great American artist. And, and then, or it could be, Bob's parents were fine, but then one's children, like Joyce Lucia, who went suddenly schizophrenic at a very young age, and she was a talented artist. And the trauma that causes alone to a family. So that was a double whammy that Bob was dealing with at that time. And again, it's a testament to his practice, whatever you might call it, his interior exercises, like you said, drawing attention back into his interior self, that helped get him through. I mean, he told Israel Regardie that it was your work and the work of Leary and Crowley and all the stuff, and Lilly, that basically helped me not have a heart attack during that time. And he's going through all that stuff while dealing with existential survival money pressures. So the fact that he didn't turn to alcohol, and he's a testament for he did acid. He told Greg Hill in a letter, like, when he would Bob got hit with bouts of heavy depression, but what got him out was use of acid, marijuana, and reading Nietzsche, is what he said. And, so this was part of his eclectic metaphysical style. He made it all his own. I think this is his unique value as a writer, to show how you can self-initiate in all these realms and put all these things together. However, you need to ballast yourself in science. You have to learn science. You can't get away from that. Like, I think some people do, and Bob is a nice reminder of that. He fails himself at times, but yeah,
he does. No, really well said. And for the times we are today, as we were emailing, the times we live today would make the 60s seem like Little House on the Prairie. Our roaring 20s is insane. How would you say that maybe Wilson's ideas or attitude can help us navigate when the entire world is in chapel perilous, when reality is crumbling, when nobody can predict anything right, when it seems like the trickster is running the entire show. I mean, I think Wilson would have had a blast regardless. But how would you say his ideas can help us cope with the world today?
Well, yeah, I think one always has to laugh and never
Yeah, you
forget
gotta
to
have a
laugh
sense
at
of
the
humor. If
absurdity
not, you're dead.
of this present moment, how absurd it really is, but how dangerous it seems to be for some, and how liberating it seems to be for others, regardless of my thoughts of it at the moment, thinking in a Wilsonian way. Yeah, he once said to an audience in the 80s that he tried to apply 8 different interpretations of like whatever event or moment or situation. Did he do that all the time? I don't know. But I think that he would, look at things through a multi-ordinal perspective and whatnot, right now. In terms of tools to get through this collective chapel perilous, I think one needs to read my book to get all the tools, truly, really, truly, because, I poured so much in there, really, of all these different techniques that Wilson utilized over the years of his life to maintain like a homeostasis, to maintain his centered balance as much as possible. And I think, there's a nice quote. I'm not quite sure who said it, but it's like, sometimes survival is enough. It's magic, right? And when you live in a time of dissolution and everything is not a benevolent sort of dissolution, like it's more important than ever to ballast yourself in the grip of your own senses, study your, as the 5%ers say, gain knowledge of self. Really, truly, what does that mean? And this is the humanist tradition anyway. I mean, Wilson, in my book, is a stalwart attempt to really place him in the canon of and the hall of great humanists, right? Because he embodied, even though he's speaking about certain transhumanist trends that are coming down the line, that's great. You want to become a cyborg, that's all good, but do you know how to be human first? Because one is not just born innately with the knowledge of how to live as a cultured human being, if you will. You have to do the knowledge, and if you're doing the knowledge of yourself, learn as much as possible about yourself. So, for instance, he borrows a term from Alfred Korzybski called, organism as a whole interacting with environment, and then he adds as a whole. So just contemplating on that, like we are organisms as a whole interacting with an environment as a whole. Well, when you look at his 8-circuit model of intelligence, him and Leary's, and he later renames it 8 system models of intelligence, we are comprised of all these different systems. The body is comprised of the circulatory system, integumentary system, digestive system, et cetera, et cetera. And then there are all these different feedback loops within us. And we function off of a conscious brain. Like we think we have will enough to move things around, but we don't make our hair grow, and we don't make our nails grow. However, we do. That's our body doing that. We are doing that, but that's our unconscious mind doing that, right? If our unconscious lies in our body, gaining this deeper knowledge of self through science, right? Through creative visualization, if you understand where a certain body part is in your body, you could actually help heal it when you're sick, or even learning how your digestive system moves. Then you know how to like rub your stomach if you have gas, right? This is simple stuff. Like, but he made science magical, and he dared to, just like Crowley, declare that science was magic, so. Learn the science of self. That's what will get you through no matter what, because this is the theme of, the Aeon Byte Gnostic radio is that this is just a veil then. So what's beyond this, and what will get you through to the next phase, is a deeper knowledge of self. And I think that's his continued lesson, is just there's always so much more to learn, because our whole mechanism, our whole body, there's like a camera is always closing the aperture. There's always so much more light that we can let in. So we have to learn how to stretch like yoga to bring in more light.
Yeah, really well said. And again, I repeat, he said, reality is anything you can get away with. I always see him as a great case study of somebody whose reality changed on him. He was a skeptic. He was doing the Discordian and screwing with people on Playboy, and suddenly realized, as you write, that when he went to San Miguel de Allende, he went to his chapel Perilous experience, and he was like, oh my God, the Illuminati is probably true. You know, reality has a sense, the universe has a sense of irony, and you've got to be careful, right, Gabriel? It will pull the rug on you if you're over there, you know, standing your ground or trying to be too egoic. Reality can change. We can create our reality. Maybe he created a reality. Who knows?
Well, that being his, you know, an aspect of Chapel Perilous, where it seems that things change, you know, faster than we can, you know, put a sign or signifier on them. And if reality seems to be dissolving, you know, having an understanding of what we called reality to begin with will help, you know, and we have to utilize, we have to learn more about science consistently. And, you know, and there's more and more scientific discoveries being made. Like, for instance, the fact that humans, we finally accomplished nuclear fusion in December 2022. And then we did it again 6 months later. Nuclear fusion, you know, theoretically being the ultimate game changer, it promises a major technological overhaul for humanity. You know, so many wars are fought over resources like oil, right, for instance, and the fact that this major accomplishment is done during this really time of huge global, you know, turmoil, I think is you know, so dramatic. It's a true symphony. And the goalpost is there. We never had this goalpost before. We have attained it. We have attained the seemingly impossible. We have attained nuclear fusion. So I think Wilson would be all about putting as much energy and effort and getting people as aware as possible about doing this again, and making sure that this becomes a technology that is, you know, available for everyone. But of course, we have all these different pressures happening in the world right now. And, you know, I say all that too, like, you know, yeah, Bob is a wild-eyed mystic, but he's also a grounded, he never lost his desire to, you know, fight the power and pump a fist in the air. Like when he was in a wheelchair, you know, in his early 70s, he took part in the you know, demonstration for medical marijuana at the steps of Santa Cruz City Hall, which when it was illegal to, you know, be smoking weed in public still, right? And Bob was one of the first to receive his medicinal marijuana. He was there at a protest and protesting, you know, ill treatment, you know, done to people who are medical marijuana activists. And so he took part in this. He accomplished his civic duty of being, you know, a true citizen as well. Like, we have to make our voices heard, redress of grievances and all that, right? Like, we have to speak up and get out there. But at least Bob had a long view understanding of things, which I find really fascinating, that he was able to hold such a far out perspective in balance with everyday life. You know, like you say, for instance, like, you know, Philip K. Dick, sadly, you know, his anxiety kept him inside the house, right? And then matched with, you know, the pep pills, he was just writing nonstop, you know, like, you know, Bukowski went back to the bottle, like, you know, all these people, right? Like, but Bob was really, that's what I find fascinating, like how he was able to integrate this tremendous engine to be a writer of extreme output with all these practices, and not just relying on a crutch, not just a day of writing done, hand me the bottle. You know, it was like a day of writing done, give me some acid. we're going to do some visual meditation or something like that. So, yeah, he's a fascinating character.
Oh yeah, for sure. Well, as we get to the end, Vance, do you have any final questions for Gabriel?
Yeah. What was it like? How close were they, Timothy Leary and Robert Anton Wilson? I know they traded ideas and so forth. I'm not sure, did they hang out a lot together? You'd already mentioned that he campaigned to get Leary out of jail. What can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I mean, they were close, I'd say, kind of kindred spirits. They first met in 1964 when Bob first learned about Leary through Alan Watts. Watts was kind of like an early mentor for Bob. He introduced him to Zen, Leary, and then Aleister Crowley, right? So Bob was he wrote an article for the Realist magazine, Paul Krasner's magazine, came out in 1964, as I said. And it was at that meeting, Bob and Arlen went to Millbrook and to interview Tim. And leaving that meeting, Arlen said it, and she was like, "That's a guy we got to watch. That guy's going places." Wilson was inspired by Leary's approach to psychology, which was seeking to apply what Leary called a post-Einsteinian perspective, essentially trying to apply quantum physics to psychology. And Bob was a fan of his work. Bob understood Leary was rooted in group psychology, developmental psychology. He liked his psychological work before the psychedelic stuff even. And so in the 70s, Leary gets arrested, breaks out of prison, goes on the run, then gets arrested again in 1973, and then is sent to jail for 2.5, 3 years. It's during that time that Bob really campaigns for Leary's freedom, as I said. And it's after that, when Leary is freed from jail in May 76, he and Bob become very close. I should say but during Leary's imprisonment, Leary asked Bob, "Hey, you want to co-write this book with me? The Periodic Table of Energy." And that eventually becomes basically the 8th Circuit model of intelligence, what they both create kind of together in a way. And
yeah, it's funny. Leary, I actually saw Leary also live in Palo Alto one year.
Don't tell me he was a jerk too, man.
No. He was in his stand-up comic phase. He said, "I'm a stand-up comedian." It was really funny. He was pretty entertaining.
Good. That's good to hear, at least. Yeah, he was a bit of a different sort of social presence. It seemed a little more gregarious, it seemed like, Leary. And I think that's why they worked well together, because, and then, of course, kind of like a deeper bond was that, Tim's daughter, Susan Leary, became schizophrenic too.
Oh, wow.
And she had a very tragic end as well. She killed herself, I believe, like in prison or something. And so, and then both of them are these Irish American fellas, and they both love Joyce. They both absolutely love Joyce. So there really is so much for them to talk about. And then they sadly have this sort of tragic bond where they're both dealing with children who are schizophrenic. I mean, Bob was he loved Leary, though. He thought Leary was like, as I said, he wrote this book about him. He thought Leary was one of the most important scientists in America during, ever, it seemed like at times, right? And then, during the 80s, they did a lot of tours together. After Leary gets out in 76, Bob's already making moves to help his books get published. They do a bunch of tours together, and they're basically seen as like a Cheech and Chong of the psychedelic scene, if you will. They're
Cheech and Chong great again. That's all.
What I mean? Yeah. So and then by the time Leary passes away in the 90s, they're very close. They might not have seen each other all the time, and when Leary was asked to appear on an episode of Bill Maher's Politically Incorrect, very close to the time of Leary's death, Leary was too sick to go. Bill Maher was friends with Leary. Leary was like a huge all these Hollywood people loved Leary. Leary was living in the Hollywood Hills. But Leary sent Bob in his place to that episode of Politically Incorrect. So that kind of shows like how close they were in a way. But not only that, how much Bob represented. Leary thought that Bob was a great consigliere. Like he spoke for him very well, if you will. So
yeah, thanks. Interesting insight.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to bring up, and apologies, but when you brought up Alan Watts, in your book, he says Alan Watts once told Wilson, "The greatest error of historians is the idea that the Roman Empire fell. It never fell. It still runs the Western world through the Vatican and the Mafia." So, of course, that brings us to Philip K. Dick and his idea of the empire never ended. So interesting how these things were up in the air. And awesome. Yeah. Well, the chat has some great discussions. They were arguing about the reality of math in the chat. So it's getting very meta over there. But a good group. Lastly, for sure, for this, again, we're in the internet, so conspiracies, and of course, Wilson would love to hear it, but connections to the CIA, agnostic, right? They won't deny or confirm. Isn't that where we are, Gabriel? Maybe if they make the JFK files and the Epstein list, we'll get that in there.
I like the way you put that, Miguel. The CIA is very agnostic as far as Wilson's involvement with
about
them.
So much.
Yeah. I mean, I did a round of research on that. I had always, it's weird. Like throughout the course of writing the book, I encountered a couple of people here and there when I mentioned Bob, and they're like, "Oh yeah, he was in the CIA, right?" And I was like, "What?" Like how
it becomes like a trope. Yeah,
how it became sort of like a trope, right? And I sort of delineated that. I think that comes from when Leary was released in 76. He already had his image tarnished from his time in prison during then, because the feds had wanted Leary to give up or inform on people in the Weather Underground and or the Brotherhood of Eternal Love. So they wanted to use Leary as a tool to go further up the chain, if you will. Leary, this became a contentious thing. Did Leary snitch or not? The public record shows that Leary, no arrests were ever made of anyone in Weather Underground or Brotherhood of Eternal Love from Leary talking to the feds. Mm-hmm. I think because Leary was talking to the feds, word got around underground, and they're like, well, the exact story is Leary had a beef with his lawyer, Michael Kennedy, who was a go-between for the Weather Underground. Kennedy was like this kick-ass activist lawyer, had a long career with crazy cases, and Leary's was one of them. So Leary's, I don't want to get too deep in the weeds, but by the time, the Berkeley Barb editor had put together this, I put this in my book, had put together this conference that was basically poo-pooing all over Leary while Leary was in jail. They were saying Leary's a snitch. Leary's snitching to the feds, because Leary was incommunicado for 18 months. The feds were moving him all around and not letting him in prison, not letting him talk to anyone or have any communications. So in that void, conspiracy theories were being produced. And one could say the feds were letting those conspiracy theories build in intensity because it matches along with this COINTELPRO tactic called bad jacketing, where you put a false claim on some, activist, and you separate him from his people. They think that he's a bastard now. So by the time Leary came out, the King of Acid in 76, the underground or the culture heads were like, he's a bastard now. And Bob was like, no, you don't understand the whole story. And he kept giving Leary a chance to tell his side of the story in the Berkeley Barb, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know if everyone at the time did all that research on Leary. So they might've just been like, screw that guy. And anyone with him now, yeah, they're CIA. That's a CIA plant right there. that's not to say that Leary may not have had babysitters, intelligence agency babysitters.
Handler, yeah.
In the book, I believe I put it, there were those who believe that a man named George Koopman, who admitted for working for the Defense Intelligence Agency at the Kook desk, kind of like the original Mulder, right, from the X-Files. He was all up in the, exploring physics and UFOs, and he got very close with Tim Leary. And he even wrote some stuff with Leary, and they were involved in a rocket company. They were going to build rockets. And Koopman died a mysterious death in a highway crash in his 40s, like while he was working on these rockets. So there is some intrigue. And there were people who believed, like, Jack Sarfati and Saul Paul Sarag, that George Koopman was an agent of some kind. But in following the line of Wilson as an agent, Freedom of Information, I said a Freedom of Information Act to the CIA. And, after a few letters, I received their response, which was quite agnostic. And it was as I call it, the glowing Glomar response, which is sort of like their modus operandi for most, responses to FOI requests. And that's, we can neither confirm nor deny Wilson's involvement, et cetera, et cetera. So not very helpful. But, if we want to explore the conspiratorial sides of things, it is interesting that, it's called perspicuity, being around interesting events, if you will, or people being connected just by being close to each other. Like Bob was around a lot of wild things throughout his time. He was always in these scenes. In the late 60s, he was deep in the Chicago activist scene. In the mid 70s, he's going deeper in the science, Berkeley science scene, where there's the emerging generation of the hippies who save physics, according to David Kaiser, the particle physicists who dared to question the ontological implications of quantum physics and who thought about ESP and the paranormal. And of course, Bob was around Berkeley when the Stargate project was happening at SRI, Stanford Research Institute. And he had seen Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff speak and whatnot. And there's a series of articles, though, that might shine some light as to Wilson's involvement or whatever. He wrote in the Berkeley Barb 4 articles in a row around 1976 or something, how he heard about how intelligence agencies were seeking to militarize psychics. So he was a whistleblower, right? But he didn't he didn't expose, if you will, what was going on at SRI. Another journalist named Jack Anderson was writing about that, but he did speak about a British psychic who, was it the MI5 or British intelligence was trying to recruit to then utilize for their own sort of programs. And we know now that there was, as I said, CIA, DIA, Navy intelligence, perhaps, the Stargate project that had been sponsored, that had gone on for roughly 23 years and was happening when Bob was in that area. So also here's another wild thing. When Bob was living in Yellow Springs, Ohio, his family doctor happened to be the brother of a woman named Ruth Paine. And so for JFK assassination buffs, that's an alarming name. And not to go into too much detail, but Ruth Paine is basically the last, person to help Lee Harvey Oswald before he goes and he assassinates the president. And Ruth Paine happens to have these associated links with the CIA, real life links with the CIA is usually someone in your family. Bob came from a broke ass Irish family. He's lucky that he made it where he made it. I don't know if maybe there is some really esoteric, arcane CIA intelligence agency program that seeks out struggling, zany fringe writers and tries to influence what they say. They've done that in the UFO community, and they did it with journalists or whatever. But was Bob, did he get the hand on his shoulder and was told, like, you're working for us now?
Yeah, they did it with Gabriel Garcia Marquez and a lot of big time writers. Yeah, unfortunately.
So some involvement, like Carl Jung, right? Like a lot of these intellectuals were involved in the OSS. Right?
Yeah,
so
Jung was, yeah.
And so, but that's a wartime sort of thing. Like Bob was great at really sort of like bringing awareness to the CIA becomes a boogeyman within, leftist kind of conspiracy theories, like over many, many years, like because segments of the CIA have done some really dastardly things to other people, and of which they're still keeping that secret. As you said, like they still haven't released all the JFK files, although they were supposed to. We'll see if the Oompa Loompa in charge is going to do that or not, as he promised, like so many things.
He better.
Yeah. But so, I mean, the deeper you get into looking at all this stuff, there's always more questions, always more rocks you can turn over. And I mean, even the person who was most obsessed with finding secret agents, James Jesus Angleton, the head of, I think counterintelligence of the CIA, got so obsessed for looking for Russian moles that he himself even questioned if he was a Russian mole, a la Scanner Darkly. So, Bob understood that, like, this, I mean, it's a real thing. And this is why investigative journalism is so important. And, how you look for how to find some things. And because many people can get into assertions, but you need to be able to present true arguments with evidence, claims, and whatnot, so, but I got a slightly conspiratorial mind. I mean, was Bob in the CIA?
Yeah. Hey, one of us could wake up and find out we're in the CIA, like said, Scanner Darkly Manchurian Candidate. I mean, that's part of the legacy of Wilson. Question everything, trust no one. And it's nothing wrong with that. As they say, being paranoid sometimes means you've been paying attention the whole time. So
yeah, choose your reality tunnel.
Add that I would bet, if I'm betting, Bob was not in the CIA.
If you had to, okay. Yeah. I would probably go that way too. Well, awesome. Well, yeah, we are at the end. I think Graham was saying in the chat that he saw the Moody Blues twice. I hate you for that. And Timothy Leary is my favorite Moody Blues song. A couple of chats. Thanks, Graham. Well, somebody's thanking you, Graham. And 5 tons of flax. Well, thank you, Dave the Dude, for that. So, yeah, as we now are at the end, do you have... well, it's already on the show notes. How do people find out? What do you want to send people?
I guess, firstly, people could go to my website, chapelperilous.us. Also, I'd like to encourage people to check out my writing on Medium and also Substack. So gabrielpatrickkennedy.substack.com. And I suppose my Blue Sky, which I don't even know what my Blue Sky address is yet, but I'm on there. I'd say mostly through my website right now, and those 2 websites I just mentioned. Yeah.
Great. Well, check it out. Again, we only touch maybe 5% of the book. Some people are already ordering in the chat. So yeah, get the book. This is the book when it comes to Robert Anton Wilson, and I'm very glad you made it and created. Of course, I've got the links on the show notes, so it is there. Yeah, definitely buy Gabriel's book. Please support Aeon Byte for all subs. We will have the mini podcast after this that I use with Notebook LM, so it's always good to summarize things. But yeah, please support us paranoid creators, even if we may be in the CIA, but yay, what are you gonna do? But at least we're making a more interesting world, so we better get going. Vance, thanks for keeping us company in this reality tunnel.
Oh, sure. And maybe next time I'll tell you guys about my encounters with Russell Targ and Hal Puthoff.
Oh, that sounds good.
Sounds like a plan. Awesome. Yep. All right. Well, Gabriel, thank you very much for coming on the show. And yeah, good luck with your book, and good luck with your creation and multimedia ventures.
Thank you very much, Miguel. Thank you for having me. Thank you, Vince. Thank you,
You
everyone.
bet, Gabriel. Good luck.
Yeah, and for everybody else, enjoy the rest of your weekend. And yes, find out who you are. Go on that inner journey. And that's it. Take care, everybody.